I'm Colleen Jennings-Rogensock, Vice President of Cultural Affairs at Arizona State University and Executive Director of ASU Gamage. And it's my pleasure to welcome you here to ASU 365. First of all, I want to thank the crew here at 365 and understand that President Crow, when you think about moonshots, this was one of them. President Crow said, 7 football games a year happen here, and we love our Devils, go Devils. But it's 7 days. What happens to the other 98% of the time? And he called me and he said, I have this idea. And I said, what's this idea? He goes, we're going to turn this into a community union. There's going to be great things that happen here. It's going to be terrific. I said, that's great. Who's going to do that? He didn't say anything. So I started listing people. I threw people under the bus as fast as I could, and he said, oh, stop. It's going to be you. But I was very fortunate because there's a brilliant crew here, and I'm going to ask them just to raise their hands because they are the power and the thought processes behind this. John, Kimberly, Derek, Sienna, Caitlin, David, Christine. These are the people that make it happen. These are the people with the great ideas. So great people hire great people. I want to welcome all of our honored guests. We are so happy to have you with us this evening. The importance of diversity in the arts is pretty self-evident. Look at the company that you keep. I just left LA Freeze with the creative capital artists that were there. I'm a founding board member of a foundation that supports artists doing new things, taking new ventures. We've supported over 900 artists. 78% of them are BIPOC artists, 78%. Which is extraordinary. The first American to win the Man Booker Prize, Paul Beatty, was one of our artists, an African-American man. I only need to look at the company we keep at ASU. Mitchell Jackson, who won the Pulitzer. Ayanna Thompson, the leading Shakespeare scholar in the world, who was dramaturge on Broadway in Macbeth. Daniel Bernard Romaine, #1 opera, #1 composition with the New York Phil, #1 record. These are all ASU African Americans, and we're very proud of them. This is a difficult time in our country. When we think about things like the DRAG initiative, and we know that trans people are being hurt. We know that there's violence against our Asian American and Pacific Islander brothers and sisters. Our Jewish brothers and sisters are under attack. Books are being banned. Why diversity in the arts? Because the arts have one thing in common. We are able to make the unfamiliar familiar. These learned guests who are with us today are going to make space familiar to us, are going to make creativity familiar to us. We also know that there's 3 key questions you ask in a relationship. I ask any artist, what do you want, what do I want, and what do we want together? And it's that part that we work on together, that sweet spot, which expands us, which grows us, which creates community. In this very football stadium, we had a marvelous work by Paul Rutger called Banking While Black. Paul recreated one of the banks that was burnt down in Tulsa using the pieces from Richmond, Virginia, another Black Wall Street, and we had it out here on the deck. About 175 people came a day. Bank constructed from the real bank materials. You put a slip into the teller, a screen lights up, and it talks about Black economic violence. It talks about Black economic pluses. It quizzed you. People who would come here to see the Pat Tillman statue came upstairs to see the Banking While Black, and it was extraordinary. This piece is now traveling around the world. Happened here. Just as I look out and see your space capsule out there, which I'm so excited about, we did that with Paul. Boots Riley, sorry to bother you. This brilliant crew said, Boots, why don't you come here, and why don't we show your film on the screen? We want to thank Adam Collis for that. He not only came, there were not only 5,000 people on the screen, he not only did an interview, taking questions on the ground, he was like a rock star. He said, I'm going to open all my movies at ASU 365 on the football field. Our president, Michael Crow, when George Floyd was murdered, many university presidents came out and said, that was really a terrible thing. That was really an awful thing. Michael Crow came out and said, we must do better. So he had us create the LIFT initiative. My partner, Dr. Jeffrey Wilson, who is a biomedical statistician, and myself chair a council of faculty, staff, graduate student, and undergraduate students. We have a 25-point plan, which we have followed through with several of those, including cluster hires. So you don't just hire one person that looks like me in a department, you hire 6, so that we're not alone. We don't know what our history is here at ASU. We are doing that history. We're doing a climate survey to say, do you feel comfortable? Do you feel safe? How can we change what we change? We hired a person from President Obama's team who created the difference engine. How do you make differences in your community? All of us are difference engineers, so you could sign up to do that work. Right now, that difference engineering program is working with the city of Compton, where they have imagined their police department from scratch. Citizen run, citizen evaluated, citizen hire, from the beginning, from the ground up. We also, through the LIFT initiative, have looked at our own, reimagining our own security and what does policing mean in this day and age. There are a number of things. We have a council member here with us, Dr. Kinja Hassan, and she has been working with us. How do we bring the outside community in and the inside community out? So the LIFT initiative is our moonshot. We are far from done, but it's our inspiration here. Arts are involved in that as well. I want to say one thing to you that's critically important, and it's a one-word phrase, and I want you just to say with me, Ubuntu, Ubuntu, Ubuntu. It's Swahili, and it means I am because you exist. I am because you exist. I am because you exist. It is now my pleasure to introduce Dean Stephen Tepper, who is not an ally. I don't believe in allies. Allies are easy. He's a collaborator. A collaborator means you have skin in the game, that you are committed beyond just standing beside me, but making a difference. Collaborator? Thank you.
Wow. Space to inspire Colleen Jennings-Rogensack. Let's hear it. Always inspiring. What an inspirational leader for all of us. I want to thank you and the ASU 360 Community Union for this event, for the whole weekend, which is going to be fantastic. I hope you'll talk more about it tonight. And a big thank you to Dr. Sian Proctor for her vision and inspiration to bring all this forward, this series of events this weekend in celebration of Black History Month. It's really tremendous. And later this evening, we're going to get to watch the Black Panther on the field for those of you that can stand the cold and the wind. Come on, it's Black Panther, Wakanda Forever. You can go out there. You can do it. This is a continuation of just a remarkable series of films, some of the most influential stories ever told in film. And the Black Panther, of course, is the work of filmmaker Ryan Coogler and producer Nate Moore. And Nate is going to be joining us on the panel in just a few minutes, so I look forward to that conversation. The Black Panther movies are powerful for many reasons, but one of those is their ability to transport us to another world, a world where we can look at ourselves and gain some perspective, making the familiar unfamiliar and making the unfamiliar familiar, to Colleen's words. That's the power of filmmaking. That's the power of art. It allows us to have some perspective on ourselves, and it turns out that's a pretty hard thing to have. In the case of Black Panther, that filmmaking power is turbocharged by emerging technologies, the same technologies that give us virtual reality, extended reality. These technologies are absolutely historic. These are some of the most powerful technologies of human expression. They are in the same category as Gutenberg Bible, as moving pictures, recorded sound. These are not sidecars. These are main events. They are going to be driving our human expression for years and years to come in so many dimensions of our lives together. And ASU is really trying to lead in this space. We're hiring new faculty. We're building new graduate programs. We just opened our brand new MIX Center, the Media and Immersive Experience Center in downtown Mesa, many of our staff today are from the Mix Center. You can build, dream, imagine, create anything in this facility. And importantly, we have launched our XRts Immersive Media Fellowship Program. And Dr. Proctor is one of 3 of our first XRts fellows, together with Martha Mendizabal and Sultan Sharif. And these are extraordinary disruptors and transformers. This technology is so powerful, and in the history of the human species, those that get to be first adopters typically look like me and don't look like Dr. Proctor. And we're going to do that differently at ASU because of our powerful commitment to inclusion. So this fellowship, it's co-run by the Herberg Institute and ASU Gamage, supported by our New American Council. We have our 2 chairs, Chuck and Lori Goldstein, with us tonight. Thank you, Chuck and Lori. These fellows represent diverse communities with diverse backgrounds and powerful, powerful voices who get to work with our faculty and our students. And Sultan, did I introduce you too? You're here with us, but I wanted to make sure that I pointed you out, Sultan Sharif, who just spend like 3 minutes with Sultan and your brain will literally explode. Literally will explode. So these fellows get to work in our great facilities and with our students and our faculty and our technical teams to imagine new ways to use these extended reality technologies to advance justice and social change and new ways to imagine ourselves and our world. A SpaceX astronaut, an ASU alum with degrees in geology and science and education. Sian is the 4th black woman in space. 4th, is that right? Okay, and the first black woman to pilot a spacecraft. We have other astronauts in the room as well. We have astronauts, we have technologists, we have artists, we have scholars, we have Colleen, who's all of those things. So you're also an Afrofuturist and an artist and a poet, and you're working with ASU's Interplanetary Initiative. ASU has an interplanetary initiative. Just think about what that is. You're working on something called Jedi Space. Jedi Space is a term that you invented to describe the fact that we all need just and equitable and diverse and inclusive spaces. We need that for all of humanity. Every time I've seen you present your work, there's this incredible optimism. You can just see it on your face right this minute. You're an astronaut, and you've wanted to capture your experience of seeing Earth for the first time using some of these most powerful tools of human expression. That's part of what you're doing in your fellowship. You want us to be able to see something different, to experience something different, both in a critical way, but also in an unbelievably optimistic way, in a deeply human way, to understand the potential for human change and to see that art and culture are so important as vehicles for that change. Octavia Butler, who's one of my favorite Afrofuturists, and just to keep in the theme of today's panel, wrote about a new religion called Earthseed. And Earthseed is where change itself is God, and where such a religion might find its home among the stars. So Sian's imagination lives among the stars. And perhaps that is exactly the space where we need to occupy in order to see the possibilities for radical change in our world, and then to enact those changes here on Earth. So I now have the honor of introducing our moderator for today's panel, Dr. Aviva Dove Viban. Dr. Dove Viban is an assistant professor of film and media studies here at ASU and a contributing editor for the Scholars Writing Program at Miss Magazine. She's the co-editor of a collection of essays forthcoming this spring with Lever Press on public feminism from academy to community, and currently finishing a book project for Rutgers University Press titled There She Goes Again, Gender, Knowledge, and Power in Contemporary Film and Television Franchises. She holds a PhD in Visual and Cultural Studies from the University of Rochester, as well as a master's in art history from the University of Virginia. Please welcome Dr. Aviva Dove Viban. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you all for being here. It's my honor to moderate this panel, and I'm going to be introducing the panelists as well. But I wanted to start by thanking the evening program sponsor, which is the ASU Interplanetary Initiative. The Interplanetary Initiative is answering the big question, how do we build an interplanetary future for all of humanity? By preparing future space innovators, developing new space hardware, and accelerating research to solve our most pressing challenges in space. The Interplanetary Initiative engages all disciplines and sectors across its many programs to create innovative solutions for more peaceful and prosperous future in space and on Earth. Intrigued? Learn more at interdisciplinary.asu.edu. The Interplanetary crew is eager to hear from you. So now it's my pleasure, to introduce the panelists for this evening. I wanted to actually start by saying I have a sort of co-moderator who's going to be asking a question or two as well for this evening, Ayodele Adiola. He is a global disruptor, entrepreneur, runs a social enterprise called No Thirsty Kid that provides renewable and sustainable technology to provide water for displaced and underserved communities in West Africa, primarily in Nigeria. He is also a graduate student here at ASU at the Thunderbird School of Global Management, so I'm really excited to have him here as well. And then to my left is Nnedi Okorafor. She is a writer of science fiction and fantasy for children and adults. She's the winner of Nebula, World Fantasy, Eisner, and multiple Hugo Awards. And her debut novel, Zara the Windseeker, won the prestigious Wole Soyinka Prize for Literature. With her comic limited series, the Hugo-nominated Black Panther, Long Live the King, Nnedi became the first woman to write the character of Black Panther, T'Challa, in the comics. She has also written the characters of Shuri and the Dora Milaje for Marvel, along with her own graphic novel, the award-winning LaGuardia for Dark Horse. Her novel, Who Fears Death, is currently being adapted into a TV series by HBO, and her novella trilogy, Binti, is being adapted into a TV series for Hulu. So, welcome, Nnedi. And then, you already heard a little bit about Dr. Sian Proctor, who is in the center. But she is a geoscientist, astronaut, artist, and poet. She uses a collage art style to combine real-world concepts with future-driven themes and technology. Dr. Proctor was a crew member on the SpaceX Inspiration 4 mission, the first all-civilian mission to orbit. The Inspiration 4 crew launched to space from Kennedy Space Center on September 15th, 2021, and orbited the Earth for 3 days. She is the first African-American woman to pilot a spacecraft, the first African-American commercial astronaut, and the first African-American to paint in space. That's my favorite. She is the artist and explorer in residence at ASU and a Herberger Institute XRts fellow at the ASU Mix Center. She's currently serving as a member of the National Space Council Users Advisory Group, as a representative for the Maricopa Community Colleges. Since 1999, she has also been a full-time geoscience professor at South Mountain Community College in Phoenix. And then, sorry. Thank you. All right, just a clap for everyone. No, I have to introduce revolutionary art rock new wave goddess Nona Hendryx. She is a vocalist, songwriter, musician, and multimedia artist. Tackling social issues, love, and politics, Hendryx's career spans decades of sound and style evolution. Longtime Nona Hendryx fans know her as one of the groundbreaking group La Belle, with their *1 worldwide hit Lady Marmalade, Voulez-vous coucher avec moi ce soir? The songwriter came into her own as a solo artist post-La Belle on rock-infused albums. Her 2012 album, Mutatis Mutandis, is that right? Mutandis, sorry. Changing Those Things Which Need to Be Changed, blends her music with lyrics expressing a global, social, and political zeitgeist. She's also an ambassador for artistry and music for Berklee College in Boston and Berkeley NYC, and curated and performed in a production she created for the Metropolitan Museum, Nona Hendryx and the Disciples of Sun Ra in the Temple of Dendur. She's composed music for the Roundabout Theater's production of the Broadway debut of Trouble in Mind by Alice Childress, and received a grant from Jazz South Arts to compose music for a new play about people of color in the fields of science, Young Nerds of Color by Melinda Lopez, directed by Dawn Meredith Simmons at the Boston Central Square Theater. An Afrofuturist and visionary, Nona develops XR installations incorporating artificial intelligence, augmented reality, and virtual reality. Is Nate here on the screen? Sorry. Oh, there he is. And we're also welcoming virtually Nate Moore, who is VP of Productions and Development for Marvel Studios. He was a producer on Black Panther and Black Panther Wakanda Forever, among many other Marvel titles. And he was instrumental, and we should all thank him for this, in pushing for the inclusion of more Black characters in the MCU. So now that I've gotten through all our illustrious panelists, I want to start by addressing the topic of this panel. So we've been talking about Afrofuturism, which, just to clarify for anyone in the audience who doesn't know, is a term that was coined to describe science fiction and fantasy narratives that intersect African American experience with their African ancestry through mergings of past, present, and future. But Black Panther and Wakanda Forever are both set in an African nation and don't necessarily privilege American, Black American perspectives. So I wanted to ask all of the panelists if you could speak a little bit sort of generally about how your work intersects with the idea of Afrofuturism or African futurism. And I wanted to actually start with Nnedi because I know that you very explicitly have framed your work around an idea of African futurism, right, as opposed to Afrofuturism. So we'll start with you, but I would love to hear from everyone.
Wait, repeat that question one more time.
Just how...
I was thinking about everything that you said before that.
No problem. So how your work intersects with the concept of Afrofuturism or African futurism.
Okay, yeah. Well, it's really what my work is it doesn't just intersect with African futurism, but it is it is African futurism. And for those who don't know what African futurism is, I wrote an essay on this defining it. It's you just Google African futurism and Nnedi. And the reason why I say that is because I wrote this essay very carefully to define the term. And I know if I just kind of rattle it off of the top of my head, I will get something wrong, and that will send you in the wrong direction. So yes, please look that up. But at the crux of it is African futurism is more deeply, the foundation of African futurism is African, first and foremost, and then it branches out to the rest of the world. So that's what it is. And how does my work intersect with that? I as I said, I wouldn't say that it intersects. It's the foundation of what I do. Like the stories that I've written. I've been writing for, I think my first novel was 2005, and even from the very beginning, the idea of the future of science fiction, and also the foundation of it being African, is particularly Nigerian, because I'm Nigerian American, has been the inspiration and the foundation of what I do. So yeah, I mean, like, how does it intersect? It is. It literally is that thing.
It defines it.
Yes.
Sian, Nona?
Yeah, so, having the opportunity to become an astronaut and think about myself as, an African-American woman, being the first to pilot a spacecraft, and what that has meant to not only myself, but to other women of color. And but that transcends not just America, but thinking about on that global platform that I've been given through the Inspiration 4 mission. And so when I think about the art and the expression that I want to create, and you can see a lot of that in the room on the sides here, this idea of a future narrative where women who, African American women in particular, play a central role in the theme of the future of human spaceflight. And when I think about the poem that won me my seat to space, and talking about how we need to strive for this Jedi space, this just, equitable, diverse, and inclusive space for all of humanity. And if we don't actively pursue Jedi space on a global scale, then we're taking all of our issues that have, plagued humanity since the beginning out into the cosmos. And who wants to do that? I don't think, hopefully we can all think about a future where we are trekking together instead of Star Wars, Star Trek, right? Even though I'm using a Jedi metaphor of it's a Jedi space, but it's a Star Trek idea of that we will boldly go together, all together into the future, and so I just feel like I now have found my authentic voice as an artist and a poet, and having this XRts fellowship with ASU has helped elevate that, and so I'm really glad to be here.
I have to start with mentioning Mae Jemison, because she was a big influence on me, and believing that women of color would go into space, and I met Mae, so I wanted to mention her because it's very important to me, and that she used one of my songs, Women Who Fly, as her training song. So music was influencing science, and science was influencing music. So that's where I see, that there's a book called the Physics of Jazz, and jazz musicians and scientists and technologists sort of live and think and create in a similar way. And that's where I see, and when I talk about Afrofuturism, I go back to Sun Ra. And Sun Ra was very influential for me in terms of a music that people couldn't comprehend, but it was a music that a group of 25 musicians, some of them still alive today, could play. They didn't really have charts, but it was memorized in their body. And so how Afrofuturism, in terms of it's the past in the present moving towards the future. And that's what the Afro, for me, that's what it stands for, and then the futurism, that I who come from the past can, this sort of, the idea that the past, the future, present, and the future are one. It's a continuum, there is no difference. So those are my thoughts around Afrofuturism.
Fantastic. Yeah, absolutely. This sort of merging together of past, present, and future. I can't see Nate, but I trust he's there. I don't know if you would like to address this question.
Yeah, I'm here, and I'm getting a real bad echo, so I'm going to try not to listen to myself. Look, I think Black Panther is very much built on the back of ideas of Afrofuturism and now African futurism. I think what was interesting in making those movies, from my perspective and Kugler's perspective, was making sure that we got the cultural aspects of Africa correct, more than the ideas of the technological advancements of the place. Because we are not African, we're African American, and we wanted it to be a true homage to cultures that we admired and we learned about through the making of the movie. And we also wanted to inspire people. And I think what's interesting about Afrofuturism generally is the idea of being allowed to imagine a future that we're a part of, and not a future that happens in spite of us or next to us or around us. And, as a kid who grew up reading comic books and watching movies, I do think it's important to see images of yourself excelling at things that we're not naturally known for, or that we're not naturally portrayed as being good at in other media. So, I do think if the Black Panther movies move the needle at all, it would be in how it inspires kids to think about themselves in a different way.
Thank you for that. Actually, that segues really nicely into another question I wanted to ask, which relates to both what you're saying, Nate, and also to what Nona was saying towards the end, which is this idea about imagination. And all of you in your work in various ways integrate sort of real technologies and sort of dreams of future possibility, right, for sort of technological innovation or space travel into these sort of fantastical or creative spaces, right? So art, writing, music, filmmaking. So for anyone who sort of wants to start with this question, where do you see the line between sort of reality and fantasy or reality and science fiction, and how do you cross that line? Sort of how do you sort of find the space sort of between the real and the fantastical into that imagined future?
I went to space, so I think I'm not quite sure if this is reality or if I'm still dreaming, because my life changed so radically, so quickly. But I just think about how we are dreamers. We are creative, and we imagine futures for ourselves. And when I imagined myself becoming an astronaut and a pilot and all of these things, but I think one of the things is how do we create imagery in the presence that sparks the imagination for the future. And so I think as an artist, for me, a lot of it is when people walk over to these tables or they see, the images on the sides of us, I want them to imagine what a future would be like with some of the imagery and the poems and the things that I create. And so I think that it's about being here in the present and being able to actively be a part of shaping that future that we want to live in and create, not for just ourselves, but for future generations.
Yeah? Okay.
Please.
I have on a watch that was like the Dick Tracy watch that I used to see in the comics, for those too young to know about Dick Tracy. I am wearing the watch that I was looking at and going like, that's impossible, right? There's so many things, because I lived long enough to see them happen, and the innovation that happens. And just if you think about, somebody said the Wright brothers, they wanted to fly, right? All these things that we imagine as human beings that we want to do, we want to create, we are capable of, because somebody has the idea, somebody dreams it. And when the internet, that people, how humanity, how people can create things and share them with others for the betterment, is really what we discuss a lot about what we do. And because I am a musician, artist first, I know what I do, how it affects people, because they respond to me right then and there. I think when I connect that with technology, because people think, oh, technology, that's something very separate, that's a computer, that's it. But when you can bring technology to people and they see how right then and there it has an effect on them, they can see the future for themselves. And that's what I do with working with young people, with children, specifically young women of color, for them to see the possibilities for themselves, all right? And that's where I see, that's my story.
I think for me as a science fiction writer, I think about how I even started writing science fiction in the first place, because I didn't grow up reading science fiction. I didn't grow up enjoying science fiction, because when I would pick up science fiction narratives, I would see these stories where it wasn't that I needed to see myself. I didn't need to see myself in the story. I needed to feel like I could possibly exist in those worlds. And I'd read these stories, and I did not feel I could possibly even exist in that world. And that's not a comfortable place to be. So I would just kind of either I'd start vibing more with the aliens or the others, or I just wouldn't read the narratives at all. And so that was how I grew. That's how I grew up. With that, that was my relationship with science fiction. I started writing science fiction in a different way. Like, I was inspired to write science fiction not because of those narratives that came before. It was trips to Nigeria. It was trips with my parents and my family to Nigeria. And the reason why, like, I've grown up going to Nigeria, and like that's a big part of my identity and my background. But it was when I got older that I started noticing technology, especially cell phones. So once cell phones started showing up, whenever we'd visit, we'd first stay in Lagos, which is very futuristic in itself. It's this futuristic, fast-paced, amazing, sometimes scary, often scary city. And then the other part of the trip would be in a more rural, the southeast. And we'd stay in these beautiful houses that didn't have electricity or running water. So there's already something kind of mysterious about that. You know, you're seeing the ancient and then the modern already juxtaposed against each other. So that was already, this was before I was writing stories. And then when I started seeing cell phones appearing, that kind of got my mind going, because I was seeing these small, really powerful supercomputers that were chargeable, that didn't need the infrastructure. And I started seeing like just very traditional moments, like you'd see palm wine tappers with a cell phone. They'd be at the top of the tree looking at their cell phone. You know, that's like that juxtaposition again between the ancient and the modern. And so when I saw that, I started thinking, what is this place gonna be like? And there's always been a curiosity in me, like just a curiosity in my environment. So I'm seeing these things, and I started thinking, what could this place possibly be like in the near future? Like, what is that? Like, how would this place be affected? And that's what led me to start kind of imagining, you know, what these parts of the world that often are not in science fiction narratives. That's where I started imagining, like, what will the technology be like? And then I started thinking, well, if people from these places start creating technology, it might be different from the way they'll create technology over here. And what could they possibly come up with? Because people create what they want to see. So different people from different parts of the world are going to create different types of technology. So then my brain was just going. So I think that, like, it really comes down to that natural curiosity, and then just kind of jumping that line.
Yeah, I love it. Nate, did you? I didn't know if you wanted to address this question or not.
Yeah, no, I think what's interesting when we're building out these worlds in the world of Wakanda specifically, a lot of what we talk about is trying to be as close to real technology as possible so that it doesn't feel too fantastical, and then detach audiences from what we're trying to do and say. And so what I think is interesting about that then is if it does feel sort of near future and not too far in the future, or so technologically advanced as to be magical, hopefully it inspires people to try and figure out how to actually make that practical today. So, you know, I think your original question was sort of how far afield do we go from what is real when building these sort of hyper-futuristic worlds. And I think that's one thing we talk a lot about in Marvel generally, is we want it to feel like the world outside your window, slightly heightened, so that you can aspire to achieve it someday, and not so heightened that it feels like, well, that's impossible. Because you know, again, if our movies are fortunate enough to move the needle in any way that's real, it's because people feel like they can maybe do it themselves.
Yeah, I think, you know, that is one of the things that is really fascinating about Marvel, is its ability to sort of bridge it with our sort of real world. I wanted to throw the next question to Ayodele, if he would like to ask his question.
Yeah, I know that it's quite interesting, because I also had my upbringing in Nigeria over 30 years of my life. And my grandfather, that was a 90-year-old man, would talk about Wi-Fi, would talk about multiverse. We'll talk about dimensions that I thought were folklore. You know, it was until recently when Black Panther came out that everything seemed to be full circle. Now, my question is, does it seem like there were previous civilizations that perhaps had this black to the future? Because I believe that the Afrofuturism is about us embracing not just our past, but even the past that we don't know. Could it be that it's come in full circle, or could it be that civilizations that pre-existed us are reoccurring? You are the creators, you're the artist. Where does this inspiration come from?
Yeah, I mean, like, there's always the past, present, and the future. For me, I imagine them to be, they're not linear. They're all commingling. They're all affecting each other. They're always affecting each other. So, like, I think this idea of the past coming back to the, coming back to the future. Just the past returning to the future, and the past affecting the future, and then the past happening again. It makes sense to me. I mean, that idea goes right along with the way that I've always viewed time, and just this idea that everything is not it's that linear aspect doesn't appeal to me. Everything affects everything. So this idea of civilizations reoccurring again, it makes sense to me. It sounds completely logical.
I can see it through, when you think about creativity, when people, if you go back to the original voices and how people, or carvings or writings in caves, the original technology of the wheel, the original, that's the first technology because we were able to move and travel. So I think so many, and what we know from archaeology, there were amazing cities that were built and ways of living that thousands of years ago that we may see our life and our time here as some very modern place that we're in, but it was a very modern place for them because that's what they were creating at the time. And so we are constantly recreating ourselves in the same way as we have children. That's a recreation, it's a regeneration, and the future children will look maybe at what we think as amazing science breakthroughs as really, really not so smart. because they'll be living in their time. And so, yes, I think, how they travel may be in a different vehicle. And when I say vehicle, it may be not even a vehicle. So when I'm thinking way, way out in the future, and I look at something like Black Panther that pulls some of those elements, some of the things I know, some of the things I recognize from what would be termed as the past, what would be termed as ancient history. But you can see the shapes, you can see the relationship. Color has not changed, right? The spectrum has been the same. It's just how we see it. And it's the same thing with any of the other things that are in life. There's nothing new under the sun, as my mother told me. It's just how I apply it, how I see it, my perspective, and that's what we do. We see with new eyes as we live through our lifetimes. So I don't know whether I'm truly answering your question, but but that's how I see this continuum of life. It's just like this ongoing. And in the time that I'm in, and the time that you're in, and the time that they're in, that is their perspective, and the thing that matters to you. You know, that's modern for you. What for my mother, that I perceived as old, was new and modern for her, right?
Thank you.
You know, my brother's sitting here, and I think he could attest that I don't know if you would have said I was that creative growing up as a kid, and so I don't know what ancestor I'm tapping into, but he would probably agree. In the last couple of years, my creativity and the way it's been expressed is different than anything that I'd had before, and I keep thinking about, you know, when people ask me like, oh, where are you getting your art from, or your poems and these things, and I'm like, I don't know, it's I'm tapping into something out there, and if it's an ancestor, keep it coming, you know. And I think that that's what's interesting about creativity and imagination, and the reaching out into our minds that expand out into the ether of the cosmos, and against all of these different maybe parallel universes, but the non-linear time, and then being able to, you know, grab something and bring it in, that thread, that inspiration for yourself, and then, you know, you kind of like process it, and then you share it back out to the world. And I think that that's what happens, and we're just starting to kind of like get to a level with digital technology and this fusion of what we think of the concrete world versus these other kind of realms we're starting to better get a handle on that and understand that, but it's opening up doorways that we never ever imagined. And well, we are imagining them, and that's what's fun about it. We're actually creating and imagining these things in real time. But I love the idea of us having this kind of circular relationship with the past, the present, and the future.
We're coming up on time for the movie, so I want to ask my last question about Black Panther itself, and I want to start with Nate. So when it was released in 2018, Black Panther was not only a huge hit for Marvel, but a groundbreaking film because of its predominantly black cast, its complex and strong female characters, and a really dynamic plot that addressed things we don't often see in big, major Hollywood films like colonialism, among other things. So starting with Nate, and then I'll get to the other panelists too. If you could just tell us a little bit about what you feel Black Panther sort of broadly's greatest impact was, and if there's anything that surprised you about its reception particularly since it has become a film, right, over the years.
Yeah, I mean, when we were making the movie, we were more worried about what it would do if it didn't work than what it would do if it worked. Because obviously movies with that cast and that filmmaker aren't made very often, if at all. And so Ryan and I would talk a lot about, like, man, we got to get this right, because we don't want to be the reason why other films that look like us aren't made. And then the movie worked in a way, it almost certainly exceeded our expectations, I think partially because it allowed people, I think two things. Often images of Africa, at least in Western cinema, are not very flattering. So it felt revolutionary because you got to see Africa in a completely different light than we're used to seeing, in a way that let people who look like us feel sort of proud of our heritage, even if we don't know what that heritage is. And Ryan and I would talk a lot about, and before we made the movie, neither of us had been to Africa, but that notion of not really feeling proud of your history, partially because we don't get to know it really, and partially because when we do see images of the continent, it's usually through a Western gaze, and that's typically not flattering, and or through characters that don't look like the people who live there. So I think it was a little bit of seeing something new just because it's just not in the marketplace. The other thing that I think we were really surprised about was not only that it worked for African American audiences, but also for wide audiences, and by the way, Asian audiences and Latin audiences, it allowed everybody to feel really proud about being culturally immersed in anything. You know, I remember, you know, one of our post supervisors on the film, who is from Mexico, came to the first film's premiere in sort of traditional Mexican garb, because he said, well, it's the first time I felt like this could be embraced, because it's not just about, again, Western culture, it's about all cultures. And I think, again, if there's an impact, that's one of the things I'm happy about, is hopefully people of all cultures get to go back and feel proud about their cultures, because there's stuff we can pull from and should appreciate from every culture. And that hasn't historically always been the case, at least not in cinema.
Thank you so much. That's, I think, a really interesting perspective on this. And I'd like to sort of throw that out to the rest of the panelists as well. So you're, either if you want to speak about how you feel Black Panther and Black Panther Wakanda Forever, but no spoilers in case people haven't seen the film, how they are sort of impacting the cultural landscape more broadly, or your sort of personal sort of experiences of the film or films. Whomever.
I you know, growing up watching Buster Crab, none of you responded to that, so obviously there's a generational difference here. But watching this like little spaceship go across, you could see the string, right? So we've come a long way, baby. And to see something like Black Panther, and to see young children of color, you know, doing the Black Panther sign, dressing up at Halloween, having, you know, being very proud of their costume, that it was a cultural shift, and a really, really important one, in so many ways. Not just that you could see yourself, and see yourself presented as kings and queens, and the princes and the leaders and the rulers and the, you know, and for specifically for you know, Black people or people of color who've never been to Africa. I've been to Morocco. Some people say it's not Africa. I say it's Africa. And, you know, to actually have that that sense of pride in who you are, and what you, and actually, and thinking that what was presented is that you had this amazing ability that in a long time ago, right? And I think that people identify that with having something special within their culture, that they were not this thing that was less than, that was an animal, that was chattel, that was to be owned, that was a slave. You know, even though it was seen as fiction, I think it imbued in a lot of people a sense of like, okay, let me follow this and find out who I am, and know who I am, and be who I am in the world. So it had that impact for me, and I think for many people, especially for my little nieces and nephews, and my great nieces and nephews.
You know, I'm a science fiction writer, and I've been doing this for a while. So, you know, there are ideas in Black Panther that were not new to me, and they were not new to a lot of us Black science fiction writers. There were many of us who were writing, imagining future Africas before Black Panther happened. So for people like me, I think the biggest impact that Black Panther had was that it showed that stories that featured futuristic ideas about the continent of Africa were marketable. That people wanted to see those things, and that it could make a lot of money. That was a big deal. One thing that I will say is that before Black Panther came out, I can't remember what year this was. It was probably around 2010, 2011. I'd written my novel Who Fears Death came out, which was set in a future part of Africa, and it was African futurism. And at that time, Whoopi Goldberg was really interested in it, and she took Who Fears Death to several studios, which I will not mention. And what they told her, they told this to Whoopi Goldberg. They said, "This is African science fiction. We don't do that." You know, and so like that is not said now. That is not said now, and that can definitely be attributed to the success of Black Panther, and that's a really big deal. I think that the films have moved the needle in a direction that was like the films destroyed they destroyed a gate, you know, and that's something I didn't think I would see on that scale so soon. So that's been refreshing for me, and just like witnessing that, especially in 2018, was definitely a beautiful thing to see that. For those of us who are like on the inside of these narratives, and we're dealing with certain forms of gatekeeping that were very, very frustrating, that the phenomena in 2018 was just amazing.
I want to go to Wakanda. You know, when I think about this movie, and I think about me as a kid and watching Star Trek, and you know, Lieutenant Uhura, Nichelle Nichols, and you know, women that I wanted to be, and the life that I wanted to live, and the people I wanted to be around, and that didn't necessarily exist in a lot of the stuff that I was seeing on TV in the movies. It was somebody else's, the people that didn't look like me, somebody else's story, and then, you know, sitting there and watching Black Panther and being like, man, I want to hang out with these people. Like, I want to find them. I want that to be part of my community. And knowing that the way it made me feel about where we are today with being able to break down these barriers, and just having that, the care that was taken in knowing that if they didn't do it right, it would slam the door and close things down again for African science fiction writers and African dreamers and Afrofuturists, because there is that perception that any stories or things that have to do with people of color does not sell. And it's all about being able to sell and make a profit versus being able to create that Jedi space that we want for the future. And so I'm really thankful to the care that was taken.
Well, here's to breaking barriers, right, and moving forward into the future. So, unfortunately, I think we're out of time for our panel, but that means the movie gets to start, which is exciting too. So I want to thank all of our panelists, Nate as well, and all of you all here in the audience and out on the field. And I hope that everyone enjoys Black Panther: Wakanda Forever.